Welcome to the latest episode of our podcast series for financial advisors. Today's episode is What's on the Mind of Elite Advisors and Teams? It's an industry update with Mindy Diamond. I'm Jason Diamond, and this is the Diamond Podcast for Financial Advisors.
At Diamond Consultants, our mission is to help advisors live their best business life. We want every elite advisor to find exactly the right place for their business and their clients to thrive, whether it's at a wirehouse, a regional, boutique, or independent firm. As the industry's leading recruiters and consultants, we've transitioned more than $250 billion in assets under management in the past decade, and each year, 25% of transitioning advisors who manage $1 billion or more are our clients. If you'd like to talk, please feel free to give us a call at 908-879-1002. Are you a financial advisor who's curious about whether you're in the best place to serve clients or if there might be a better way to optimize your business for the future? Should I Stay or Should I Go is a new book that serves as a self-guided journey, walking you through the key steps that Diamond Consultants takes with our advisor clients, whether considering change or not. Visit diamond-consultants.com/thebook to learn more.
Reaching the upper echelon of success in the wealth management world is something that many advisors strive for. The reality is that the path there is not an easy one, the result of which is driven by design, not left to happenstance. So how do they get there? No doubt, elite advisors possess unique mindsets and methodologies that contribute to their growth. And there's much that advisors at every level can learn from the industry superstars. So that's what we're exploring in this special industry update. Mindy Diamond will be joining me to dive into what makes these individuals and teams different. We'll discuss what they focus on, how they think about their business, and even the challenges they face, plus much more. There's a lot to discuss, so let's get to it. Mindy, thanks so much for joining me to discuss this important topic. I'm thrilled to have you here.
Yeah, and I'm thrilled to be here. I love this topic.
Absolutely. For some context, let's define what we mean. When we talk about the industry's best and brightest, or to use our term, elite teams, who are we specifically referring to?
That's a great question. I think what we're referring to are teams that are generating in excess of, say, $4 or $5 million in annual revenue and managing close to or in excess of $1 billion in assets. And that number has really gone upstream in the last number of years. When I started the business 30 years ago, $1 million producer was considered an elite team. And obviously that number has ramped up. But when we say an elite team is not just about numbers, but it's about the fact that they really run their business as a business, that they've got a unique infrastructure, that they've got a unique niche, that they've got clearly defined processes. Everything about them makes them elite and special.
I agree with that. It's less about the number. I use the old definition of you know it when you see it. What we're really speaking to here is the corner office wirehouse teams, the elites of the branch and complexes that advisors walk through every day. One of the reasons why we frame this population differently, in part, is because we'll touch on kind of the way they think about their business and some of the concerns and challenges they think about, which I do believe are different from some other advisors. But the other reason I think we bifurcate this population is because historically, these elite teams were the least likely to move. Why do you think that was in the past, that these teams were oftentimes lifers or loyal to the firm?
That is the anomaly of it all. So first of all, I think it's the biggest reason is because they were just incredibly well served, that historically the biggest teams got exceptions made for them. Not only exceptions in terms of wanting to get something done that was outside the norm, but they were the ones that if they did something the slightest bit wrong, if they colored outside the lines, compliance often looked the other way. Today, the opposite is true. The elite teams, the best and the brightest, may well still have a bat phone to the top. They may know how to get things done. They're well positioned, but they don't get the exceptions that they used to. When UBS, for example, initiates a comp change, that comp change affects every advisor, whether you're the head of a $5 billion team or you're an individual advisor doing 500,000 in production. In terms of vulnerability, what's become even more true is that the bigger the team, the less likely compliance is to overlook any slight infraction. In fact, if anything, I'd say they are often made an example of and often have a target on their back.
I think that's spot on. I was thinking about this through the lens of what these advisors have to lose and what they have to gain. And I think the old school thinking was those folks have the most to lose. They were so tied into the firm, they were so successful, they had a bat phone to the top to leadership, they had a lot to lose. And the thinking has been flipped on its head a little, where now two things are true. First of all, those same advisors also have the most to gain. And we'll talk about some other firms or models that may solve for a lot of the things that frustrate those advisors. So, certainly the most to gain, but also you've alluded to this in your answer about compliance. They have the most to lose should the status quo change materially against them. Correct me if I'm wrong, but is that your sense when in speaking with top wirehouse teams? It's not so much Merrill or UBS did this, it's more they could do this in the future. Is that how you think about this? What's coming down the pike?
Yeah, 100%. I think when I started the business 30 years ago, it was a lot of what drove movement at any level of production, but particularly among those $1 million advisors we're talking about was how much of are the deals? I want to monetize the business and it's all the same. In other words, everything I'm doing for my clients at firm X, I can probably do at firm Y. And if my deal is up and I'm a free agent, why not monetize the business? Today, for sure, what corner office teams think about are the long term, the big picture. They're focused not just on today and am I able to serve my clients well enough, but they're focused on two things. One, exceeding good enough. Like good enough is not just good enough. And two, they want excellence for the future. Am I set up in order to best maximize the value of the business I've built at day's end?
Yeah, so let's use a real world example here. You brought up the UBS comp change because this is a live, timely one that's obviously been on the minds of a lot of wirehouse advisors. So UBS announces we are making meaningful material changes to our advisor compensation grid. I would call that the event, right? And in our experience, what I think we're saying is while advisors worry about the event, I think it's equally about if they can make that change, what other changes can they make 2, 3, or 5 years from now? And oh, by the way, to your point earlier, there were no exceptions granted here. So what does that sort of signify? Or is the writing on the wall? And am I worried? But I think to take that thinking a step further, Mindy, isn't that just the reality of working in any employee firm? If you're an employee of any firm, don't you have to worry that they can make policies that are going to adversely affect your business?
Yeah, using that UBS comp change as an example, big firms change compensation plans all the time. What was unique, I think, about the UBS one, and not to beat UBS up or focus on it, but what was unique about that change was it seemed to affect advisors all across the spectrum. Not just there was the bigger you are, the less of an exception you are. Now, that said, in talking to many UBS advisors, many of them just yawned at it. Yeah, it may have affected me a little, but that's how it goes. And on par, I'm served very well. And it's certainly not something that's going to make me want to move and go through the hassle of making a change. That's probably how the majority of advisors feel, because you are 100% right that as long as you are an employee, you are captive in one way or another to the decisions or the mandates that the firm makes. But the cool thing about the industry landscape today is that as it's expanded, there are degrees in which there is a lack of control that an advisor has. And what I mean by that is that if you work at a wirehouse, you don't have a whole lot of control. Now, the bigger the team you are, the more control you may feel you have until something happens that makes you realize even though the clients may be loyal to you, you don't really own your business. But as you move further right on the continuum, as we describe the landscape, and you get closer to the regional firms and the boutique firms and independents, that's where advisors tend to have more control. And that desire for more agency or control is a lot of what drives movement.
So I agree with that. I think a lot of times we get the question in order to really get away from the bureaucracy and the red tape and the pressures to cross sell and all of the things that frustrate and changes to comp plans, you need to move or start an RIA or go independent. What excites me about the industry landscape, and we see this play out with these elite teams every single day, teams that look at independence, ultimately realize it's a bridge too far, and circle back and actually realize there are traditional W 2 options that actually check a lot of these boxes. And yes, of course, anytime you're a W 2 employee, you have to worry that the firm has the right and probably will make changes in the future that may not be what's best for your business. But there are real degrees to that. And I think to lump every firm, every captive firm into one bucket of, oh, it's a big bureaucracy, I think you're doing yourself a disservice because to your point, the regional firms and the boutique firms and even many RIAs that advisors affiliate with as a W 2 employee, I think would be a breath of fresh air for a lot of these teams.
I agree with that totally, and I think that really brings us to the biggest point, and the point we wanted to make the most in this episode is that what's driving movement today amongst elite teams, and the pendulum has swung, it's those elite teams that are actually moving with greater frequency than
Yep.
smaller individual advisors or smaller teams. And the number one thing that's driving it is less about I'm annoyed because my firm did X, or I'm mad at my branch manager and I need to leave, and much more about big picture, thinking about my business as a business. And the industry landscape's expansion, the inclusion of so many interesting and unique and legitimate models that didn't exist before make it more possible for an advisor that doesn't want more of the same and has specific things to solve for, more likely to find their version of utopia.
So I agree with that. And I think as I think through the industry landscape, it's not so much that I view it as dramatically different for these elite teams. In fairness, elite teams have more choice than other teams because every single firm on the street, in all likelihood, will be interested in them. But the reality is, even $1 million producer has many of the same options available to them as an elite team. They have the wirehouses, the regional firms, maybe the boutique firms, and certainly the entire spectrum of independence. So if the solution set is the same or is at least somewhat similar, and you're telling me that a lot of times it's about these big teams or feel a draw or a pull to something else, what is it specifically that draws them? Is it about client service? Is that generally in your experience what these teams point to is, oh, I was limited in my ability to do X. And when I moved to Y, I was able to offer my clients this? Is it something else? How do you think about that?
Yes, to all of the above and then some. So first of all, I love the fact that you brought up the notion that we're defining elite teams and we're talking about what do the $5 million teams managing in excess of $1 billion do, but it's also what can everybody else learn from what they do. And you're 100% right that in large part the solution set is largely the same. Without equivocation, the desire to do best and better for clients is across the board. The desire to make sure that they are building a business that eventually they can monetize and optimize is across the board and should be. The desire to protect their team and have agency over how they grow the team and the path to partnership and all of that agency over how the team grows and hiring and firing is important across the board. So it doesn't matter whether a team is $1 million or $5 million, all of that is the same. Now, it's an inside job. It's a matter of individual preference. What might be the most important things on a team or an advisor's mind? But some of the most popular things are a desire to do more or better with greater freedom and control for clients. It's about wanting to set the business up in the best possible way for the future. And I think for a long time, most advisors who worked at big firms just assumed it's all the same everywhere. And from a broad brush perspective, that might be true, but it is enormously untrue around the margins that depending upon the size of the firm, the kind of firm, the model, et cetera, what you can do for clients and how you're able to grow the business can vary giantly. And those are the kind of things that really drive movement.
And I would argue, honestly, when we talk about elite teams, oftentimes they have many team members, not all advisors, but think client associates and trust and estate staff and investment associates and the like, to frame this through better client service, but also the ability to make your team happier and to service your team better. I think that often gets overlooked, that a lot of times clients are insulated from the pain because a good team should insulate their clients from the pain. But that's not to say that the firm is holding up their end of the bargain, and maybe a new firm would free up capacity and would allow your team to focus on things where they would be better spent serving their time. So I just wanted to point that out, that we talk about this often through the lens of clients. It's also fair to take, of course, clients should come first, but it's fair to take a little bit of a selfish view here and think what's best for me and for my employees and my team as well.
I don't disagree with that at all, because bringing that up reminds me of a team that I counseled, it's probably a year or two ago, a significant wirehouse team where the senior members of the team, the partners, the producing advisors, were happy enough. But it was really their team, their support staff, that every day was complaining about bureaucracy and inefficiency and inability to get things done and calls from irate clients that the producing advisors were largely insulated from. And so it was the support staff. And in a lot of cases in other teams, it's the junior members of the team, the next gen, that sort of drive the conversation.
So totally agree. And I want to bring up one other kind of, I'll call it a paradox related to this. When I think most of our listeners are familiar, transition deals are quoted typically as a percentage of trailing 12. And a traditional firm, so a firm like a wirehouse, especially for teams like we're talking about, the deals are easily north of 350% of trailing 12 all in, which means when we're talking about a $5 million and up team, these teams stand to make north of $15 million potentially in a recruiting deal. But what we actually see is often these are the teams that are less likely or the least likely to take a big upfront check. And I think that brings me to our point about, you've used the term now a few times of thinking about the business as a business. I want to talk about a little, can you explain what you mean by that? Because I think that to me is the quintessential thinking about the business as a business of, I'm going to actually walk away from $15 million or maybe 20 or 30 or $40 million upfront for something else in the long term. So dive into that a little for me.
Yeah. So, first of all, I didn't come up with that term thinking about the business as a business, but I can remember about 15 years ago where I was standing and the conversation came up. I was talking with the board member of a relatively newly created RIA. And he was talking about the fact how he himself had just come from the wirehouse world. And he was talking about the mindset of an employee, how employees are given a tech stack, employees are given a platform, employees are given a product and solution set, and believe that they are all that there is. But particularly with the proliferation of the independent space, I think people that think like business owners begin to challenge the status quo and don't necessarily accept that just because this is what I have available to me, it's necessarily the best. Now, that's not an advertisement to move, and that doesn't mean everyone should move. But it means that even if you are compensated as an employee, meaning I work for a big firm, any firm of any size, and I get W-2 income from that firm, I still think of myself as a business owner. It's a mindset shift. And that mindset shift goes from I need to accept whatever is given to me to feeling a sense of agency. And even if I choose to stay put, it's constantly challenging the status quo to make sure that everything I have access to, everything I'm able to offer clients, and everything in terms of how my business is set up allows me access to the best way to monetize it, the best way to retire, the best way to support clients, the best way to add additional services, whatever it may be.
I agree with all of that, but I'm thinking about this through the lens of, these are financially savvy people, I think, by definition, right? These are people who are good with money, and they're choosing consciously to leave meaningful, life-changing money on the table. What's the promise at the other end of that? Is it really just about, I want an option that gives me more freedom and control? Or is it about potentially thinking about other monetization avenues for the business. Like, for example, if you're independent, there are other ways you might be able to monetize the business. Because that feels to me like an important point for these elite teams, that we're seeing more teams now willingly forego some of the richest recruiting deals in history.
I think that is the point. Freedom of choice. The notion that there are many ways to skin a cat, and the cat being many ways to run a solid, growing, exciting wealth management business is really the theme of the industry landscape today. So, first of all, yes, to answer your question, when a team who's unhappy to whatever degree or thinking about leaving a major firm and going elsewhere, they will unequivocally, almost always look at other major firms, other employee options, even if they're pretty sure that's not what they want, because you can't ignore the fact that a 300 or 400% deal is nothing. It's meaningful to everyone. But some of those teams, and let's call it 50% of those teams will look at any other employee option and say, if I'm going to make the move, I want something more, bigger, and different. I want more control over how I'm compensated, my take home economics. I want more control about how I pay my people. I want control over how I retire. I want control over the things I'm able to do for clients. I want more control over a million things. And I want to be able to build a business enterprise where my equity is really worth something. And that's the reason why those teams who choose independence would forgo a big upfront check, because what they're looking for is the payday at the end of the day. They're looking to grow inorganically and recruit and acquire other businesses and add to operating leverage and expand margins. And most importantly, they're looking to build a business that they can create competition for at day's end, put on the open market up for bid, and exponentially multiply the value of that business compared to what they would get if they retired as an employee with their own firm. But it's worth noting that's only 50% of the population that would choose that. The other 50% of the population will continue to choose to work as an employee. And in no way does that make them wrong. It's just exciting to have choice. Jason, let me ask you a question. So, assuming you agree with that perspective, when a big team, an elite team, chooses out of independence, doesn't want independence, and chooses instead to jump to another traditional firm, do you think that they're not thinking of their business as a business?
It's a variation of the question of what's the right path here, right? You just laid out two starkly different paths for a $10 million team. And there's really more than two, but for simplicity's sake, it's let's take the recruiting deal and go to another wirehouse up front, or let's go independent and monetize for a significant multiple on the back end. There's no right answer. And I think in both cases, both teams or both advisors, hypothetical advisors, could be thinking about the business as a business. And they also could not, right? Just by virtue of making that change doesn't mean that you are thinking about or are not thinking about the business as a business. To me, the concept of thinking about the business as a business is more about, why did you make that change? Did you make that change because you just wanted to take the biggest check up front and that was really as far as you got in your planning? Or did you do it because you genuinely believe that your clients are brand conscious and you need the support of a wirehouse to be able to serve them, and it will help you to prospect down the line, and it's only a 9 or a 10-year recruiting deal and your next gen is young and they'll have the appetite to go down the independent path 10 years from now? So there's a lot of ways a team might still be thinking about their business as a business, but take the upfront check. I'll give you one other example, which is, there are instances when a team will just say, if a firm is offering me 400% of revenue up front and I can invest that in the market over the next however many years, I prefer that certainty to the idea that I'm going to go independent for little to no transition money. And then there's risk in, you got to build this thing and really grow it in order to be able to sell it for those multiples we talked about. And there's plenty of advisors that just don't have either the risk appetite or the entrepreneurial spirit to do that. And I wouldn't say full stop that none of those advisors are thinking about their business as a business. I think plenty of them are. They just realize in thinking about their business as a business that a traditional firm like a wirehouse continues to be the best place to serve clients. And that's a very fair perspective.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I actually think that the common ground then is not where an advisor chooses to go, even an advisor who chooses to stay put. You see, that's the thing. We're not talking about what elite advisors do to optimize their business from the lens of they all move. Many of them may choose to stay right where they are. But the idea of thinking about your business as a business means having the courage to challenge the status quo and hold it up to a new light and say, is my firm giving me everything I need and ultimately allowing me to reach my goals and ultimately allow me to maximize the value of the business the way. And as long as the answer is yes, then you're being a good steward of your business. Not every business owner sells their business. Sometimes they're in it for the long haul. And so I think it's just more about the belief that advisors really hold all the cards. They've got the leverage and they've got the agency. They just need to choose to take it.
Yeah, that's incredibly well said. It's so true, and it's an interesting model that we're an interesting world we live in, where even employee advisors who technically don't own their book of business feel very much like they do. And I think we've seen this play out enough times to know that in reality, advisors have a ton of control and call it ownership over their client book. And that comes with obviously tremendous upside, but also responsibility, I think, to make it a proactive decision. Even staying put needs to be a proactive decision, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think examples are helpful for our listeners. You and I are counseling 3 or 4 of these elite teams right now. They are all incredibly smart business people. They are all thinking about their business as a business. They are all asking themselves the tough questions. They are all reached out to us or are working with us because they want to challenge the status quo and make certain that they're in the right place. And of the 3 or 4 that I can think of right this minute, only one is even interested in independence. The other 3 will never head in that direction, and that's okay too. And they're no less good stewards for the business. They're incredibly good stewards, and their clients are lucky to have them.
I'd like to ask you somewhat detailed follow up here because something that strikes me as a little bit odd about these conversations, and I agree, there's probably 4 that come to mind that are very live, $10 million plus teams that have somewhat similar pain points. And what I notice is not on their list of pain points is technology and platform. Or said another way, most mega wirehouse teams actually feel like the technology is good enough or better, and the investment platform is certainly good enough. Is that odd to you that people who are well served on the core chassis of the business are still moving with the velocity we're seeing?
Yeah. So I love that. And it's even more anomalous because you and I have the privilege every week to sit at the mic and interview these elite advisors that left their firms and went some version of independence because that's the ones that are able to talk about their experience. Once they jump to the other side, they all talk about how superior technology and platform and the inventory of investments becomes unlimited and more exciting and better able to serve clients. But you're 100% right that while they are working for a big firm, that's not necessarily what they're complaining about because it's all good enough. Because unless you've really taken the time to go compare what you've got elsewhere, you would have no way of really knowing what's possible elsewhere. So a lot of times it's not until somebody goes out and explores independence or explores a boutique firm like Rockefeller that they begin to even notice that technology maybe could be better and make me more efficient. But the concept of good enough defines, and I don't mean that as a pejorative. It's not to say that a team who is comfortable and feels that things are good enough and has no appetite to upset the apple cart is necessarily lazy. Oh God, that's not true at all. It's just saying that good enough is just that good enough. And until you really open your eyes or look outside of what's right in front of you, you would have no way of knowing that it could be better elsewhere. But the things that those teams focus on when we talk to them are before they've gone to compare and contrast and look elsewhere are the things you and I have been talking about thus far. How do I maximize the business? I feel upset that my firm not only changed comp, but didn't give my branch manager more than 5 minutes heads up. So he felt flat footed, et cetera. Those are the things they complain about.
Absolutely. And the reason I asked that question towards the end of the episode is because What you're getting at there is then if it's not platform and it's not technology, what we're really talking about is certainly economics, but then it's the softer stuff. It's things like culture, it's things like ease of doing business. It's things like, as I alluded to earlier, ability to make your team happy and certainly your clients happy and grow your business. And I think we've spoken a lot about paradoxes. That's another one of these paradoxes we run into is that, especially in this market backdrop we've seen where markets have rallied like crazy, a lot of advisors are enjoying record years and record success. And yet we're seeing more advisor movement than ever before. So I know that it's unfair to ask you, what should these teams do, Mindy? But I've heard you use the phrase, here's your calculus. Give me the basic calculus that these teams are wrestling with. Like on the one hand, it's what, and on the other hand, it's what. How should these teams think about their business and what comes ahead?
Sometimes it's harder to boil it down to one or two things than it is to think about it globally. But first and foremost, it's having the courage to look at your firm as though you were interviewing with it for the very first time.
I love that.
It's starting with, what is it that as my business stands today and the things I know I want to do to grow it, how is my firm able, or my current situation able to support that? Being willing to assess how much and where there is white space between what you want to do or your goals and your vision and what they will enable you to do. Then it's about assessing, prioritizing it, the impact of it. Yeah, there may be some white space, but it's not all that important to me to fill. And to others, there's white space and it's the same amount of white space as you have, but it's really important to you. And so you may choose to move and I don't. So even if you have no intention of moving, it's constantly holding your firm, challenging your firm to be right for you and being willing to do something about it if it's not. What do you think? What would you say? Would you answer the same? Is there anything else you'd add to that?
No, that's spot on. But I do think if you're speaking about elite teams, you have to acknowledge, and we do when we speak to these teams, that they also have the most to lose. And that is certainly the ongoing kind of calculus, to use my word, of these teams certainly have the most to lose. Their businesses are the most complex and the hardest to move, but they also stand to have by far the most pickup, both economically and in terms of quality of life and client service. Our view is, and again, this is not an advertisement for moving. It's not to say that everybody even needs to take meetings with firms or do a whole bunch of due diligence, but at least internally, especially if you've got an asset as valuable as a $5 million revenue business, you need to be having these introspective conversations, even if it's just among you and your colleagues and your team members. These conversations that we call working on the business and not in the business, I think are critical periodically. Call it annually. Is that your suggestion as well?
I love that. You call them internal conversations. We often call it armchair exploration. And we talk with so many advisors that we reach out to that they're perfectly happy or happy enough, good enough, no intention of moving. But it's been 5 years since they last put their toe in the water. And they're watching people that they know and respect move and go elsewhere. And they don't really understand some of these new models or why somebody would forego a very significant transition check to do something else. And they want to understand it. Believe me, we don't do this podcast as an advertisement for working with us, but it is worth noting that we are all very happy to answer any questions without agenda or expectation, to allow somebody to do what we call armchair exploration, to get a sense of things, to compare and contrast without expending any energy, without having to go take a million meetings, so that they really can understand, is this really all there is? Is this the best there is, or is potentially there something better? And thinking of your business as a business means having the agency to decide what you want to do about it.
This was a fantastic episode, an important episode. I'm excited to revisit this topic in 10 years, and we'll be defining a mega team as 15 million and up in revenue, I'm sure. But thanks for joining me, Mindy. This was a blast.
For sure. As a financial advisor, you hold yourself to the highest standards of integrity, honesty, and credibility. You are successful because you take your professional responsibilities seriously and are dedicated to your clients. But are you living your best business life? Are your goals aligned with your firm's, or could a better option exist? Should I Stay or Should I Go is a book written with you in mind. It's a self-guided journey that walks you through the key steps that we take with our advisor clients. This strategic thought process and roadmap to professional self-discovery is designed to help you ask the right questions and think critically and objectively, whether you're considering change or not. Learn how to get your copy at diamond-consultants.com/thebook.